So you initially started out in the medical device industry and then moved over to Intuitive.
That's right.
What are the similarities? What are the differences between working on a medical device that's simply that and a medical device that's also a robot?
Yeah, it's a great question. I've been at Intuitive for close to 13 years now, coming up on 13 years. Prior to that, I was at Abbott Diabetes Care for close to 6 years. I was an engineer on their continuous glucose monitoring system. Worked to bring that system to first commercial release. It was Freestyle Navigator, now evolved to Freestyle Libre. Before that, I worked at various different startups, capital, imaging, magnetoencephalography, heart valves, catheters, a bunch of things. So not a roboticist by training, and joined Intuitive in 2013. I would say there are more similarities than there are differences.
Interesting.
Yeah, if you think about, trying to solve it's not just about trying to solve a mechanical problem or a software problem or a technology problem. It's really the similarity of the anchor is trying to solve a clinical problem. And I think that makes the two industries very similar. I would also say highly, highly regulated. And so the fundamentals of developing product in a highly regulated environment is very common between the two.
So you haven't worked at a robotics company, a non-medical robotics company. But what do you think are the challenges that are unique to designing a surgical robot?
It's not a single product. Like, we talk about the robot, but it's just so much more than just a robot. If you think of medical device industry, most people do capital equipment, or they do single use, or they do disposables. When you work for a robotics company, it's everything. It's the capital system, it's the single use, it's the multi-use, it's the imaging, it's all the different end effectors, it's the accessories, the digital, the software. So the complexity is much higher than I've ever experienced before. I would also say, maybe similar to the capital imaging industry, working on capital system has some unique challenges. These systems stay in the field for a really long time. So you can imagine, a DaVinci has over 10,000 parts in the robot. And you can imagine servicing these parts, maintaining these over the lifetime in a way that maintains reliability and safety is quite a challenge. You can think about all the supply challenges that you might have over, the lifetime of the product. It's similar, I would say, to the capital imaging, with the nuance that maybe there are more moving components in a robotic system, so that adds more nuance and challenge to it.
It's a really amazing piece of equipment. How has motion scaling, haptics, and force feedback evolved? You talked a bit about that in the presentation in recent generations of Intuitive's platform.
I would say that some of these capabilities have been part of the original design since day one. If you think about motion scaling and tremor and vibration reduction, the early designs all included these capabilities. Over successive, generations, we have improved both on the hardware as well as the algorithms to make these, better. But if you think about the core value proposition in robotic surgery, it's taking this large, scale movement of the surgeon's hand and refining that to much finer movements and much finer scale. And so that premise has continued to endure. Over time, we have, obviously improved them. On force feedback and haptics has been something that has, been an aspirational feature for a few decades now, and I think has been in the works and in development for a few decades. There are, the fundamentals of being able to feel the tissue, that was taken away. When surgeons went even from open to lap, they lost that capability. And so they had to retrain themselves to rely on visual cues and tissue effect to be able to sort of estimate how much force they were putting on tissue. So this capability has been something that's been aspirational. I think if you think about the challenges of putting really small, scalable sensors at the tip of the instruments, that has been the challenge. I think that the thought is that no force feedback data is better than bad force feedback data. So there are possibilities of making these measurements in a different part of the system. Like you can make force measurements at the arm of the robot or at the cannula, it's the metal tube where instruments go through. And you can make force measurements, but they wouldn't be accurate. And so I think, at Intuitive, we really waited for this technology to mature at a point where you're making the measurement directly at the tip of the instrument. So if you think about the size of the sensor, but also the reliability of that sensor that needs to be there to endure cleaning, sterilization, and also the economic feasibility, right, to make it work, that has been sort of what's been the most challenging.
How do you design for surgeons? I mean, soft tissue surgery as opposed to maybe hard tissue is a lot more artistry and sort of finesse. And
Yeah.
how do you build a technology that performs those highly dexterous movements?
So I think it really goes back to what is the clinical problem you're trying to solve, right? And so if you think about that problem and you say, well, what am I trying to do? I'm trying to make some clinical tasks be easier than lap. What is the hardest clinical task that you can do in lap? It's suturing, right? So what is the capability of the system that you need to design to do lap better? I think that's the problem you're trying to solve. And so if you think about, this is a challenge where you introduce mechatronics and then you introduce software on top of that to make the system perform in ways that you want it to perform. And then you make a clinical evaluation. Is this better than what's already out there? Is this better than lap? And would people want to use it? And if the answer is yes, then you're there. So there's a clinical evaluation that may be subjective, but really that bar is it better than lap?
But surgeon skill levels are of varying degrees. Do you design for those with the lowest degrees? Do you design for those with the highest? How do you take all those difference and those inabilities into account?
We design to make the system as intuitive as possible, so that that's
there it
right.
is. That's
right.
the name.
It's hard not to bring it up in the conversation, but really, it's designed to be able to reduce that training burden as much as possible.
And when you're bringing in new advances, new adjustments, new capabilities to the systems, how do you know when a breakthrough, an addition is mature enough to commercialize, given the regulatory and reliability concerns?
Yeah, that's a really good question. We have a framework and a process that we use to evaluate new technology. And, as we look at these technologies, we really evaluate, first and foremost, what customers want it, right? Is it desirable from the customer perspective? Would they want to pay for it economically? And then we look at feasibility, like technical feasibility. Do you have the technology to make this possible? And it goes back to the force feedback example. Do you have the sensors that you can implement at scale economically to make this a viable sort of product? And so we look at that holistically to make that evaluation.
And you talked a bit about data and the importance of that, and now we're of course seeing AI being incorporated into systems. What's the most promising ways AI is being used in your system today? Not for the clinical decision making, not as much for sort of control or calibration or safety.
If you don't think about for clinical, we gather a lot of data from our systems. And one of the ways that we use this data is we look at ways for implementing preventative maintenance processes. So in most cases, we would be able to know when an issue might occur even before the issue occurred. And this is part of the reason why we have the uptime that we have, is that we can service these systems using the data that we have that are coming from them and be able to predict their performance.
Let's talk about the daVinci SP. What are surgeons finding the strongest use cases for daVinci SP? Maybe give us a little more background on SP.
Yeah.
And where are the innovations occurring using the SP?
So, as you know, daVinci SP, architected for single incision and narrow access surgery. The value hypothesis around SP, it was really been around, maybe single incision is better than multiple incisions. One incision is going to be better than four from an outcomes perspective. I think as we've seen usage of this technology in the field, we've come to realize that there's more to the story than just reducing the number of incisions. So as an example, surgeons have been able to use this technology to innovate in the surgical approach. So I'll give a couple of examples. One, prostate surgery is a very common type of procedure that has full adoption on our multi-port system. The traditional approach for this surgery is that, there's an entry point into the abdomen. There's a sac called the peritoneum, which holds all the abdominal organs. And so when you have to enter into this peritoneum to access the prostate. And when you do, there's complications, right? So you are in a space where other organs exist. You are, making sort of manipulations in the space. You're exposing to CO2 and to air. So there's a lot of complications. Now with SP, surgeons have innovated on the technology. They figured out, because they can do narrow access and deep pelvic access, to go around the peritoneum. So these new approaches like extraperitoneal, prostate, retroperitoneal, kidney have been developed, and they all show much improvement in terms of the outcomes. Lower pain, faster, same day releases, from the hospital. So that's really one example. Another example that's very recent, because we just recently had this indication approved in the U.S. This is for thoracic surgery, so for lung cancer. In the traditional approach, both VATS or multi-port, the ports are placed in between the ribs, so intercostal port placements. And the ribs, in between the ribs, these are places where you've got a high density of nerves, you've got a high density of vessels, and so it not only increases risk, it increases post-operative pain, and lots of complications that go along with it. Because of the pain of having to breathe, patients don't breathe as deeply, and so they develop post-operative pneumonia, all these types of... So with SP, again, because of the ability to go deep and go narrow, surgeons are placing the port in subcostal or subxiphoid, but underneath the ribs and underneath the xiphoid, drilling up through the chest and basically accessing the lungs through there. And so you can imagine it's not an intercostal space, it's single incision. Patients, lots of improved outcomes. Hopefully we'll see based on the studies that are yet to come.
Cool. Last couple of questions, just looking ahead. How close are we to meaningful semi-autonomous functions in surgical robotics?
Yeah. It's auto-suturing, right? What I would say is, if you take a very outcomes, first principles outcomes based view, yes, auto-suturing presents some opportunities to bring efficiency, to maybe bring consistency to the suturing process, maybe reduce the operative time. Maybe, though, it's not maybe the first place I would go to if you think about what are the things that you could do to improve outcomes. So, I'll give an example. I talked about advanced imaging. So again, I'll go back to the prostate example. In prostate surgery, you're removing the prostate gland, which has cancer in it. Cancer is not visible with the naked eye. So you're removing the prostate, and then you're taking a few samples to see if there's a positive margin. And there's a high percentage of patients who undergo prostate surgery and their cancer comes back. So, but what if you could add the capability of being able to visualize cancer in real time so that surgeons could make, decisions in real time? So those are the type of, I think, conversations that we have, like where are the high impact value drivers to improve outcome and help towards moving us in the quintuple aim. Auto suturing possible, maybe not the top of the list.
Final question, just zooming out a bit. How do you look at the evolving surgical robotic market, the number of other companies out there? How does that affect your roadmap for the future?
Yeah, there are indeed there's a lot of activity right now in the space. Hundreds of robotic companies. I think from an intuitive perspective, our view is we're aware of them. We respect the work that they're doing. Lots of great work happening. Our philosophy has always been, learn from everyone, copy no one. And so we continue to take a very first principles look at what are the capabilities that we want to bring to market. And we have spent a considerable amount of time evaluating different technologies. So if you sort of go back to what is core to surgery, right? What are the things that you need to do in surgery to be successful? There are a number of things that you need to do. One, you need to find access into the body, get access, enter the body. Then you need to visualize the surgical field, so you need vision. Then you need to get to where you need to go. You need to get to that destination, so reach, access. You need to get there. Once you get there, you need to perform the clinical task that you need to do. And this is usually dissection, resection, bleeding control, and then reconstruction, right? And then you need to extract the specimen and get out. That is like the basics of surgery. And so when you think about the different modalities, what you're really thinking about is, are they better in access? Are they better in reach? Are they better in performing the clinical task? And we evaluate all those capabilities and decide on architectures based on those criteria. And so at the end of the day, it comes to architectural decisions and choices. So we will continue to be mission focused in that sense.
Fantastic. Well, thank you for sharing that vision today. Appreciate having you here at our joint meeting of DeviceTalks and Robo Business. Thanks, Iman Jeddi.